Hello, friends, fellow artists, and Art League family. My name is William McMahon. I'm here on behalf of Art League Online. Today I'm going to be switching it up and showing techniques on how to render a tree. Hope you enjoyed the video. So we are switching it up now today, away from figure, although I like to draw trees in a very figurative manner. I'm really excited about this lesson. The nice thing about trees is that if you follow certain kind of general principles or rules, you can really do anything you want with them, and you can have unlimited options to manipulate them and form them compositionally however you'd like. So I'm going to start kind of like how I start with the hand, with an arc, except for instead of the arc of the knuckles, that's going to be the arc of the trunk of the tree. And then I'm going to do 5 kind of key roots growing from the base of the trunk. I prefer odd numbers in compositions in general, and also it makes it a little bit more reminiscent or suggestive of a hand, which I think is cool. I'm trying to bring figurative elements into this piece. The single most important thing about drawing trees to keep in mind is that whenever you branch out up here and you create new forms, new branches, you're going to need to be narrowing away from the trunk. Every time you form a new branch, you have to be pinching and narrowing. The reason for that, why we can't have a thin branch that then becomes much broader, why that doesn't work is, in a word, gravity. This would snap off. With roots, I'm generally kind of having them narrow as they move away from the base of the tree. However, they're growing from the ground, so you can have areas where the roots will bulge up. You could have a much broader part of the root. At any point, I can have secondary roots growing off from the main ones and splitting at any point. If I'm going to show that the root is on the side closer to me, I'll have it grow in like that. And then if I want to show that it's on the opposite side from me, I'll leave that line in place. And that'll be similar to when we're doing branches as well. Alright, so I have some of these roots now in place, and I'm going to return back to this later. I'm going to progress the drawing. I'm now going to create the kind of trunk, and with the trunk I can do anything I want. I can have it split early on. I can bend the trunk hugely. Living in Florida, you see some palm trees that are essentially parallel to the ground. Once they grow, they'll just kind of arc over. These things can happen. I like putting some bend in my trees usually. So I'll have my trunk sort of like this, and now I'll go ahead and split it. And I can do this sort of thing anywhere I want. I'm going to show that this part of the tree is in front of that part by having this line overlap that. I'm going to split again. And now I'm going to be showing you what I was mentioning early on. Every time I'm creating a new branch, I'm narrowing. So if I split here, and you can have little areas where you'll broaden again, that sort of thing is okay. But if you have something smaller and then much broader, it's just not going to work in the realm of plausibility. You know, in art, you can ultimately do whatever you want, but if you want to make it seem believable, you just need to keep pinching. And then I'm thinking about trying to show overlap too, branches overlapping one another, and I'll draw right through. If you see this branch here on top of this one, I'll just draw right through it, and then I'll go back and erase. So we try to keep our drawings light at the beginning. I draw unusually dark for my demonstrations just so that the marks are visible for the camera, but in general I advocate for people trying to keep your drawings light, loose, and quick in the early stages, with the most important descriptive word there being light. That way we can continue to manipulate our drawings. I had a fabulous student named Sandy who had the expression that in her drawing process, the eraser was equally as important as the pencil. I think that's a good way of approaching. I'm not worried about perfection. I would rather have people get information down on the page and then respond to it, manipulate it. Think of drawing as more of a push and a pull. Whenever I'm doing this sort of thing too, I'm thinking about the negative space forms, the spaces in between the branches. That's something that I'm always aware of when I'm drawing trees. Again, I'm keeping the principle of continuing to pinch and narrow as new branches are created and as we move further away from the trunk. That I keep in mind always when I'm doing a tree, if I'm wanting to, again, have the tree exist in a believable realm. But other than that, I'm really just responding to the piece and trying to create movement and dynamism and interesting negative space forms in my piece. And the other thing that's really neat about drawing trees is that you can have branches that are very geometric, very angular, or you can have branches that are very organic and have a much more of a flow to them. And they're both believable. Trees are going to have both. So you can really just have a great deal of liberty when you're drawing trees. That can be really nice as an artist. And again, whenever I draw trees, I try to assign some kind of figurative qualities to them, or the way things bend or move. I try to suggest emotion in my trees. So I'm continuing to overlap branches and interweave them, getting gradually narrower. Really at the very end here, you can just more or less have, depending on how thin you want, essentially just single marks for your final very thin branches. Really what you can do sometimes, and branches grow in all sorts of directions, they intertwine. Sometimes I'll just draw a branch across another one, and then I'll wait until a little bit later to decide which branch I want to place closer to the viewer and which one I want to be further away. Continually narrowing, blending geometric and organic, a little bit of sort of a swoop, left to right movement. In our society, we read from left to right, so I try to be aware of that fact when I'm creating compositions. And at this point, I'm getting close to a point where I'm feeling pretty satisfied with the overall kind of composition. At this point now, I am going to establish my light source. And I have a tendency to put the light source in the upper left. Again, as a society, we read left to right, have the light hitting the left side of these objects, cast shadows moving into the right. It just has a nice flow to it. And what I'm going to do, what I've been saying in these videos is we can use edges to showcase light source and texture. So I'm coming on every side opposite the light source, and the branches that are thinner are going to be smoother. And then here, more of the trunk or the thicker branches, I'll go in and use my edge to show a little bit of that texture, the bark. Especially in concaves, now I'm starting to think about what branches are on top of one another, which branches are coming in front or which branches are set behind. Light source upper left, we think lightest light, middle, darker, darkest. I'm going to use contour lines on my branches and my roots to kind of show the viewer the rise and fall. Rough with my marks, trying to apply that texture. This is a concave, so I'm going to be even thicker there. Nice and heavy opposite the light source. And so without even shading, just by being attentive to my edges, I've now started to create some three-dimensionality with this piece. Clearly showing the viewer that the light source is coming from the upper left. As I mentioned before, we're going to think of this root as being the darkest. I'm using rolling contour marks to take the viewer up and over that form. And you have a lot of liberty with how you render roots and where they get larger or smaller, where they split off, how long they are. If you want to have grass or dirt or rocks in between, little cast shadow. From the roots onto the ground, kind of showing that plane shift. Start trickling my way up. I'll use some cross hatching to imply some texture, some rougher marks. So I'm just hitting the side opposite the light source all the way through. I'm also going to start thinking now about branches that overlap one another. So if this branch is in front of this branch, I'm going to want to put a cast shadow underneath the branch closer to the viewer onto the branch behind it. And the closer the branch is that's on top of the secondary branch, if it's actually touching, the cast shadow is going to be right there. And if it's further away, like I'll say this is a little bit further in front of this branch, I'll move the cast shadow further away from the initial branch to show that distance. Mentioned in some of my previous videos, and tree is no exception. I'm trying to progress the drawing as a whole, to bounce around the drawing. If you spend too much time on one part of the drawing, you might lose sight of how the drawing is working in harmony. To have your drawing look the most three-dimensional, you're going to want rich, dark black values, bright white values and a range of gray. If you're working on white paper, it's up to the artist to hold the whites of that paper. If you're working on a toned paper, you then manually add in your white values using something like white charcoal or white gel pen. Concaves, overlap for cast shadows, push and pull, bounce around the drawing. And as I continue to branch out into more subject matter in the videos, you'll be able to see that there's a lot of overlapping principles in anything that we draw. Draw some trees, it's fun. Thank you all so much for taking the time to check out the video. I hope that it was both educational and entertaining. Be on the lookout for future videos on rendering trees from myself. Also, we have a number of new videos on the horizon with more Art League artists.